program will look as follows. Some introductory comments by Gray Magahiza and then also the two authors, Peter and Lucius. And then, yes, you, of course, will allow us for a brief commercial intermezzo when Shay Heinrich will tell us how to access the book, where and how. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Gray. Gray Magaisa has a doctorate in social entrepreneurship and is currently head of community development at the University of the Free State, specifically the Kwakwa campus, and is also program director in the Faculty of Humanities at the same campus. And he's busy with this fascinating program, the development and implementation of a new program qualification mix in the Faculty of Humanities. And it is to align career demands with course offerings and to add value to the National Development Program of South Africa. Gray, with any further ado, over to you to introduce this exciting new volume.
Thank you so much. And good morning, colleagues. Welcome to this wonderful book launch. We've heard the title, Does Community Development Work? Question mark. Very good question for us to engage with. Stories and practice for reconstructed community development in South Africa. I'm going to speak about the book from the view of why I'm using it and will be using it in my courses and in my program. So I'll give a brief overview of the book, and I will also outline some insights about the book and suggest, maybe lobby, maybe advocate why colleagues in the broad discipline of development, community development, social development must use this book. I have included the book in our Bachelor of Community Development starting this year, and will also include the book in our postgraduate diploma program and master's programs. For a couple of reasons. The book is written in an accessible yet scholarly approach, a calm yet evocative way, but more than anything, the book provides the student, the scholar, the practitioner with a kaleidoscopic view of why community development matters. So in many respects, I'm actually answering, does community development work? I'm saying, yes, it does. And that is what the book is also saying. It answers this key question using a decolonial, deconstructive, and post-structural analytical lens that is located in an analytical perspective of what is contextual, and responsive good community development practice. Now, what does that entail? Lucius and Peter reflexively analyze their positionality in the book and in society to give an honest and refreshing perspective on their contribution to not only community development, but also to scholarship and knowledge generation. For me, this was an important lesson in scholarship. It's a lesson that I want my students to internalize and understand that it's at the point of uncertainty that critical and at times difficult dialogues and conversations must be held to foster and galvanize a socially justiciable transformation. The book is neatly divided into 3 parts, part 1, part 2, and part 3. And as one goes through the chapters in the book, the broad intellectual reach, political depth, and critical epistemology frames a core, a salient agenda that carries emerging researchers, students, and practitioners to further conversations of what community development is, to what a decolonized community development practice in South Africa must aspire to be. This is a book I will confidently prescribe to my students. Firstly, because it's a South African text. We are a bit thin on South African texts. Secondly, because it instills and recovers pride and dignity in an emerging occupation, in a people that is absolutely critical, which is an absolutely critical facet to human emancipation. Lastly, it is a book that navigates the multi-interdisciplinary discourse of the development enterprise by focusing on local examples of change, of resilience, of urgency, of adaptation, and how various micro and macro actions and intentions are vital to shaping how community development is practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a well-written and outstanding scholarly output that deals with contemporary South African development issues, but locates them within the intertwined histories of South Africa and the world. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in saying well done to these 2 veterans, if I might put it like that, of the community development scholarly enterprise. Well done, Peter. Well done, Lucius. This was a job well done. I can't keep saying it enough. I really enjoyed reading the book. I really have identified a lot of sections in the book that I'm going to be using across the different levels from 1st year to 4th year that I'll use in my Bachelor of Community Development degree here at the Kwakwa campus. So thank you so much. Thank you for the scholarly edition. Thank you for the scholarly output. Well done. Thank you. Back to you,
Gray.
Thank you, Gray. So thank you so much for your out of the heart comments with regard to this new volume. And I love the idea of a South African text, you know, because it speaks to the whole idea of the decolonial turn, as it's stated in the book. So, Peter, now over to you for a few comments.
Yeah, thank you, Jaco.
And your perspective. So, and what's near your heart?
Look, I'm Gray. You're so mysterious that we don't actually get to see you. So your voice just carried this beautiful story. Yeah. And thank you. I was thinking today, what do I want to say? I decided to use a head, heart, hand framework, you know, or start with heart, head, hand, and just so from the heart, I want to say, and here's the book, just for people if you haven't seen it, and I'm very excited that Gray has read it, because I've learned that when you write books, people buy the book, and that's exciting, but not many people read the book because they bought it. So at least one person has read it, Gray. That's a good start. So I'm going to start with heart. I wrote this book because I met Lucius in the mid-2000s in Hong Kong at an International Association of Community Development conference, and we have developed a deep friendship of love over many years. And his family, his wife, his two daughters have hosted me in their home many, many times. We've walked, we've wandered, we've sat in townships, and I have a deep love for Lucius. And people say, why do you do things you like? And my real answer is I do most of the things I like because of the people I get to do them with. And I usually stop doing things if I don't like the people. So love of Lucius, love of South Africa. I went to South Africa in 1994 as a young 27-year-old. I've been back every single year except for last year, the pandemic. And I suspect this year. I have a deep love for your country. Some friends say it's my soul home. And then I have a deep love for community development as a tradition, a humble tradition of social change, a citizen and professional project, both. And we make that case in this book. Community development's both citizens. And that's why we say, of course it works. Citizens have been using this method of coming together for centuries to achieve their goals. It doesn't always work, but it sometimes works. And of course, it's become a professional project internationally with professional practitioners. And I love that Gray is educating a generation of professionals. So that's the heart. Then I'll just go to the head. The head, I think, Gray, you mentioned beautifully, we explicitly come from what we call a post-structural perspective, which we simply means is we don't believe there's one way of doing community development. There is no essence. There are many traditions, and we actually outline some of the deep traditions globally and in South Africa. You know, when we think of people like Steve Biko, we delve into the work of Eskia Mafafela. We draw on other Pan-African thinkers like Frantz Fanon. So we certainly recognize the traditions and frameworks. But as Grace said, we also position ourselves very clearly in a tradition that we foreground. And so that's the post-structural. We also argue in the title for reconstructive community development, and this draws, and I want to acknowledge Vern Harris, who's here as well from the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Vern introduced me to the great French philosopher Jacques Derrida in Johannesburg many, many years ago at a forum reflecting on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we have both been in love with the work of deconstruction. And in a nutshell, deconstruction is to constantly be haunted by the call for justice that insists on renewal of our work, never to be ossified or stuck into thinking we know exactly what we're doing. And so the book says, there's a constant call for renewal in community development. And in South Africa, that renewal is obviously has several imperatives, including the decolonial turn. And we speak to that. Both it's the colonization of the mind of practitioners, the colonizers, the colonized, and we speak to the core issue of land, which is also part of any decolonial practice. So that's the deconstructive. And then the third head issue is we obviously tackle this question of effectiveness. Effectiveness, evidence, measuring. How do we speak to our work in a way that public sector investors in community development want to know that their investment is good? It's a return. And this is a very vexed question. And as I was reflecting today, as I walked in my garden, I have this saying, too much effect undermines effectiveness. And when I say that, imagine if you put too much water onto a plant, water being the effect of water brings life. But too much water kills the growth of a plant. So this question of effect and effectiveness, we really grapple with. The delicate relationship of community development, where we're trying to bring change, accompany change, but we have to do it with a delicacy. Because if you push, you undermine the very thing you want to achieve. It's to accompany people. And then we argue from an evidence perspective for experimentalism and developmental evaluation, and we build a very strong framework. So that's my head. And then the hand, so heart, the love, head, I've just made those 3 points. The hand element of my reflection on this book is it is a scholarly piece of work, and it grounds the work in 6 stories of practice, researched case studies that tackle questions like housing in South Africa, education, the cooperative formation, economic agenda of the state, protests from townships, communities, and a few others. So it's grounded in stories, and we elicit the key practices of community development that enabled those stories to come true. We draw on some of the things in the title, I to we, for to with. And I won't say much more other than I think our key focus on practice is the importance of the quality of the practitioner. I was rereading the conclusion today, and when you write a book, maybe I finished that conclusion 1.5 years ago. When you reread it, it's nice when you go, oh, I'm happy with that. It's like, wow, I wish I could write that now. And I enjoyed reading it. And one of the sentences in the conclusion is, communities can literally smell a community worker that is not authentic, that is there just implementing a project, that they're not there with love, they're not there in solidarity, they're not listening with a deep care and quality of care. So we argue for the quality of the practitioner as being crucial to the effectiveness of community development, as well as having a very clear practice. And a practice is to understand your intention. Community development has very clear intention to bring people together to tackle issues, challenges, make dreams come true collectively, and to respond to the emancipatory aspirations of justice. So that's my contribution tonight, and I think that's back to you, Jaco, and Lucius gets his 5 minutes before questions. Yeah.
Peter, thank you so much. Heart, head, hands, with a delicateness, that's very special, and authenticity. I think that reflects this book so beautifully. So, Gray, you wanted to say something.
Sorry, Jaco, I was just clapping.
Okay, good. So excellent. So no, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know Peter,
can I say one last thing, Jaco?
Sure, Peter.
Because I just want to name the elephant in the room. We're writing about community development, reconstruction, South Africa, and we're 2 white male authors. And we have lived with that contradiction through writing this book with great pain. And yet I think our love for one another and our desire to write before we drop dead has trumped that concern. So I just want to say that because obviously it's got to be said as well, yeah?
Yeah, no, indeed, it has to be put on the table. But, Stellan Korma of University of Pretoria put it so beautifully, Peter and Lucius. There's a whole idea, and this is what the book is about, reflexivity of discomfort of our own subjectivities and power. And I think you voiced that now. So, ladies and gentlemen, for those who don't know Peter, Peter is currently Associate Professor in Social Science and Community Development at the School of Public Health and Social Work in Queensland, University of Technology. I'm not going to say more. One of the authors of this book. The next one is Lucius Botha. So Lucius is a Professor of Development Studies and the Director of Research Development in the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences at Northwest University, and also Director of the Karoo Development Foundation. So Lucius and I are good friends, and it's such an honor to introduce Lucius to say a few words, and Lucius also to show us the table of contents for our question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Jaco. I really appreciate it, and it's so nice to see a community and the collective here, because we have so many stories that I've shared with many, many people that are in the room with us today, although virtual. But yeah, and I'll follow a different approach than Peter. Peter was very structured, with the heart and the, and the mind and so on. I will be a bit more chaotic and work a bit more inductive and not deductive. All the time in doing this book, which was a difficult time in my own journey, I don't want to elaborate on that. I've learned a lot from working with Peter, and all the time he reminded me that this should be a work of love and not a work of compliance or a work of duty or another thing that we need to get out there to boost the CV. And I think in that reminder that it should be a collaborative work of love, I think in that one can learn a lot in taking this book seriously. And I want to say that the book starts off, and sorry for the institution that gets mentioned here, with a professor from MIT. When someone asked him at the conference, without blinking an eyelid, he said, the research shows that community development does not work. And the book ended, this is why I think, with this notion that perhaps this professor should have said community development should and could work better. And this is what we try to attempt to say, okay, maybe it is time also that we are not again revisiting the traditions, the frameworks, because community development is not a new phenomenon, it's decades old. But maybe it's time to revisit it and to look at some South African stories and then come with what we can call a more social constructivist or a social construction approach to community development. And this is one, Peter has already alluded to that actually want to steer away from command and control mode, but rather work more with, through whether you're planning or funding or implementing or evaluating a development initiative, to always think collaboration, co-creation, accompanying, how do we do this together? And often we've seen, if you look at projects and initiatives, that people are good at when they actually want to sell something and invite people to the table to join their agenda. And often many development initiatives still struggle with that, whether it's from a development aid position or a contractor-driven or state-driven approach. And we actually are just pleading to say that maybe one should be a bit more sensitive, a bit more reflecting in terms of not only what you design, but your own intentions. And again, I want to remind the audience of the wonderful work that I've again read after I was recently reviewing a book where Robert Merton, an old sociologist, made a distinction between unintended consequences and unanticipated consequences. Often, it is an easy cop-out for people to say, listen, but this is an unintended consequence of what we were busy here in our social engineering experiment or whatever. But we are arguing, if we follow maybe some more cautious approaches, some of these consequences could be anticipated. And this is, I think, another thing that the book is trying to argue. I was also very, very excited to engage with some of the work of Steve Biko, Mahatma Gandhi, S.K. Mphahlele, and also Neville Alexander. Why Biko? Because for many a white South African, Biko is sort of, and other South Africans are sort of a political hero for reasons I don't have to explain. But I was quite struck when Peter actually showed me the place in Kleinmond where I used to go holidaying, where Biko and other people were trained as community animists, as community workers. You know, starting from Freire and his way of how do you ask and you conscientize people to actually then preparing the scene to do better, to reflect better on the work. So I was very, very surprised to discover the other Biko as well, you know, almost the community activist and not the political activist. Of course, also the work of Gandhi. And then I think when people talk, we didn't want to put in the title the word decolonization for various reasons. But I think this is an attempt, and hopefully an honest attempt, to declare our own positions, where we're coming from. Peter has alluded to that. But I think also a genuine effort at looking at 3 or 4 voices from South Africa, people that have spent some time here, to see what we could learn from that in enriching some of our traditions and our work, whether you work with a social mobilization agenda or a social learning agenda or approach, or whether you actually are very much emphasizing skills training or in a project delivery mode, even in a service delivery mode. We actually wanted to enrich the debate with some of the voices of our colleagues. If you can just share, just for a minute, the table of contents, Ian or Jaco. Just page down a bit, starting from the introduction. Yeah, there we are. So Gray has alluded to that. So I think in part 1, we've really tried to actually contextualize the book properly, but also then talking to where we're coming from and what are some of the traditions, the leading traditions, and then the whole notion of effectiveness. How do we know we know? Then we've moved on to what we then call a social reconstruction tradition, and building on some of these indigenous voices in South Africa. In part 3, actually, we felt strongly to assemble a group of stories. If you can page down a little bit, still Ian. And you will note it actually then deals with aspects of land, urban agriculture, rural education, community protest, and informal housing. And then also the whole cooperative movement. And in the end, we've then tried to reflect on these stories in dialogue with S.K. Mphahlele. I'm not sure whether any one of the Mphahlele Foundation is here, but thank you also so much for allowing us to engage with some of the key texts of their late father and grandfather. And in conclusion, I think, and this is, you know, where we're at, we actually then say, but, you know, what are the essence and the challenges for, you know, not only the social guidance or mobilization or learning tradition, but a social reconstruction tradition of community development work. I hope it will be, thank you, Ian, you may stop sharing. I hope it will be an exciting read for all of you. And I know it's a book launch. It's not a book discussion, because it's actually unfair to expect of people, only Gray and maybe Jaco and others that have read the book, to, you know, come with a meaningful interrogation of the book and the contents. But at least some things that you've heard, we would love to hear. How would you respond to it? What do you make of it? So yeah, that's all from my side, Jaco. I will later do a few words of thanks. But for now, I think we need to get started with some discussions, which will be great.
Yes, thank you so much, Lucius. So much food for thought and concepts, you know, on the table and so forth. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, please use the chat function and also raise your hand, and we can engage with the two authors. Just to kick us off, Peter and Lucius, and while we're in reflexivity mode, so I would like to hear which of those stories are nearest to you, the one that really touched you, heart, head, and even the one that you really wanted to get your hands dirty with. So, Peter, if we can start with you, the one story that you explore in your book, so that really touched you.
Wow.
And why? Of course, they're all your babies, but that one, yeah.
Well, I mean, Lucius and I kind of were very clear about the kind of stories we wanted to explore, that came from the inside out of communities, that the practitioners didn't impose agendas on communities, that the practitioners that we could interview had a reflexive capability. I spent time at the Huntham Education Trust down at Colesberg, an amazing few days, and a beautiful story of a community that's really living on the margins, but has for many years now emerged from no educational infrastructure to having a school, a whole educational infrastructure. But the point of that story, people now visit the Huntham Education Trust, and they just see this amazing school. They don't understand the story that enabled that school to emerge from that place. And that's what I love getting into. So, that the story of Huntham Education Trust, along with the Southern Cape Land Council, down from Kaffranet right down to the coast, with the organising of black farm workers and the levering of land back into the hands of smallholder workers. Wonderful stories, and as Lucius would say, deeply grateful that people welcomed us as colleagues and researchers into those spaces. Yeah. And I guess, Lucius, your love would be around the informal protest work, but I should let you speak.
Yes, Lucius, protest or what? Guru. Yeah.
Just very briefly, this was actually one of Peter's initial case studies, but the chapter 8 in the book on Abalimi Besikaya, there's a wonderful group of 3,000 women in the Western Cape doing urban agriculture, a community garden that works, and not something that was designed from outside and actually given to them. And that reminds me, in a way, linking to the protests and the housing chapters, that often in the housing fields, we have some housing people would know the work of John Turner that said housing is a verb, it's not a noun. So in many ways, I would say that if you read the Abalimi Besikaya, it is all about that community development, irrespective of your tradition or your practice. It is a verb, it's not a noun. And what works now may not work in 10 years' time. And also what worked in context A may not work in context D. And I think that is the challenging thing when you also deal with the effectiveness. How do we measure? And one bee in my bonnet is that many, whether it's from the state or development aid fraternity, people like to hear also success stories. And yes, we've written them up. But often we also need to take some time to talk about maybe the less successful ones. And I think that is almost the beauty and the challenge of community development work, because if you just use sort of the existing, measurement instruments, you may easily come to a conclusion, but this project has stopped functioning, it's not viable anymore, it's a failure. And we would also argue in the book, but that is, maybe an unfair, premature assessment of an initiative. It could be, because some of those events and processes could have been life-changing for some of the members, now getting some ideas and joining another initiative. And I think that is the beauty if one tries to deconstruct things and see, but it is not, on the one hand, so easy just to regard an initiative as a success now or a failure. one needs to give time, as one of my old friends has said. And sometimes, and this is, I think some of the stories you will note that it, you can see how it actually is organic. It takes time. It's from the bottom up. And those are the important stories for me.
Yeah. Peter, you and Lucius alluded to the question Ian Goldman raises. So can you say a bit more about the key interests of the cases? Maybe some of the others, so that you haven't mentioned?
Wow, I see there's a lot of beautiful questions coming through.
Yeah.
My mind's already spinning a bit. Look, the cases, I think the big issues that came out of the cases, that we were very clear that they needed to be tackling tough, real issues in South Africa: land, education, the role of the state. We're not playing on the little stories. Housing, these are big issues. That in each case study, there was a deep commitment to the relational practices that are normative, that are orthodox in community development, that practitioners or citizens listen to one another, create analysis together. They get experts to give information, but the experts always remain on the edges. The decisions are made by the community. And so all of these stories are evidenced with this kind of, you've got the trialectic, I call it: the people, leaders, experts. The people are driving with support of servant leadership and with appropriate expertise. And community development workers are always working in that trialectic: the people, the leaders, the experts, kind of holding those three key groups in a way that enables people to go at a pace that's appropriate and yet builds through stages real community social change. So I don't want to ramble on, but you've got to buy the book and read the chapters, Ian. And Sarah's asked about the quality of the practitioners, and I've kind of alluding to it: a gentle but assertive, deep listening, care, because people smell the inauthenticity. Sarah, you've got to buy the book as well. So that there's certainly questions about authenticity.
Tessa, maybe if you would like to pose your question in person, so that we get a bit of this engagement.
Thanks, Prof. Hoffman. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been amazing so far, and we're only a few minutes in. So my question is about more application, and also before having read the book, so I will definitely read it. But I am in a situation where I'm very aware of structural injustices, where I'm part of an initiative of diversity and transformation in a school that has a developed world feel to it. So it's very well functioning, but very, for lack of a better word, based on the colonialist model, and it's in South Africa. And very recently we have initiated a committee or a group of people, very diverse, which is a very big first step to address these issues. However, one of the, I want to say, procedural or things that are seen to be a hindrance is the perspective of people coming from, I almost want to say the conundrum is how to integrate or how to work with the tensions between what we see as political activism and I almost want to say bringing that to an educational sphere and the educational way of doing in terms of understanding each other. So there is a massive, I'm hearing Peter saying a lot about being willing to listen, being willing to learn from others. But my question is maybe because I'm very aware of that the only way for me it feels we're going to get there is to become a community-based, to work on this as a community-based initiative. But we are struggling, and that's why I would just like to hear from your experience. How do you see it? Because the Steve Biko comment that you made in terms of understanding the political hero, but also seeing the community worker behind that. How is that reconciled? Do you have any comments that you can, help with in terms of that? I hope this is clear.
Yeah, thanks, Tessa. So Lucius, Peter.
Lucius. Look, there's a few there, Ted. It's going to be hard for us to have a real dialogue here. I think two things, like in South Africa, many people are tired of dialogue because they're not seeing change. They're demanding change. They're saying enough. We are sick of this performance of dialogue. And I think that's what's happening in the big political spaces. Students are saying enough dialogue. We want good quality education. Enough of these dialogues on land reform. We want land. However, the community development tradition is not a political in the big sense of politics. It's always political because poverty is about power. Yeah, powerlessness. And so community development is attempting to bring people together such that they have more power. How you then claim that power is an issue of analysis. Do we claim it through more dialogue, demanding, protest? So, these are conceptual answers that are not grounded in your story, but that's probably all I can offer, as in this space. Yeah. I hope that makes sense, Tessa.
That already helps a lot just to get my thinking started. Thank you very much, Peter.
And just to add something, that's why we've deliberately added a chapter on the so-called rebellion of the poor, or on community protest. Some people will say it's not only about service delivery, it's about much more than that. So, and we're actually making the point that in some contexts, people have the fullest right to be angry. And because there's been political freedom, but not a lot of other socioeconomic freedom. However, again, it depends how you view it and how you measure it, because some people will say, but there's been huge strides. I've just checked yesterday evening that, and this was quite an interesting, piece of information, that if you look at the Human Development Index of South Africa, we've grown actually with 13%, and we know how it's constituted of in terms of life expectancy, educational attainment, and per capita income. And I don't want to get into that debate of how do we measure development. I'm just saying that on face value, it seems that in general, South Africans, the quality of life and the human development has improved with 13% from 1990 to 2021. So quite an achievement if you think that the population has doubled from 30 million to 60 million. But other people living on the ground, not experiencing, still seeing the potholes, the garbage mounting up, things not working, non-responsiveness, and this is the dilemma you're sitting with. And I think, therefore, one needs to reflect on more and more of these locality-based stories and see also, and there's more and more local initiatives now coming to the fore. Why people after the dialogue and after the anger are trying to join hands and do something, which I think are good signs that civil society is now also again populating the space, even to the extent that some people are saying, don't we need another UDF movement? And I'm not talking politics here. I'm just saying people that are fed up with things not happening, through the political systems and the state-driven structures.
Thank you, Tessa. Thanks.
Thanks. Sorry, may I comment, Prof? Jaco, I don't want to take up everything. I just want to comment on Lucius, if I may.
Yeah, you may.
Thank you, sir. So for me, it's just Lucius, in the education realm specifically, there's a massive divide. I'm hearing a lot about what you're saying about community building and sort of taking it to poverty levels and the improvement that comes from that. I'm saying that a massive challenge that we have that I'm experiencing that I don't think we're necessarily very aware of is where this community building aspect is challenging in privileged environments as well. So especially in where the education realm where I'm working at the moment, where we're not talking about where, you know, we can compete with, I almost want to say, any first world setup that we can, we are still dealing with dynamics and community dynamics that are very difficult and difficult to understand in a South African context from a privileged point of view. And I'm not talking white privilege or I'm talking literally about people who are living on a level of privilege that is not necessarily achievable for most people. So, yeah.
Can I just say, Tess, and I think I just come back to community development as a humble, community-based method of change. And this maybe answers Ian Goldman's question I see in the chat. The big structural transformational energies in South Africa will emerge from the struggles of the union movement and civil societies, big organizations with state action. Community development won't bring those big, it's in many ways a tradition of practice from the margins. Now, if communities can link together, they can obviously form structures that have an impact on national policy, regional, provincial policy. But that's quite sophisticated practice from the bottom up. But nevertheless, we are not pretending community development is the method of change. In if that makes sense, it's humble, it's small, it keeps people from. When it enables people who are really on the edge of, let's just say, death, you know, they haven't got enough resources to live, to collectivize and survive. Often that's the bottom line. Huh? Yeah. Okay.
But powerful, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Tess.
Thank you, Tessa. So, Lucardia, I will be with you in a minute. I just want to go to Ian Golden, so to hear whether he wants to make a comment with regard to his question. Did Peter address your issue?
Yeah, probably not. Structure.
Ian?
Yes. Well, sort of yes and no. I mean, I think I've been a protagonist of citizen engagement, engagement with the state, etc., for many years. But there is a problem that the context of the capitalist system we have, etc., is one which fundamentally disempowers, and we have to, it's disempowering and it's destroying the planet, and we have to find new ways. And the question, I mean, so you've got movements in developed countries like Extinction Rebellion finding new ways of mass mobilization to deal with that. The question is, what's going to happen in South Africa, and how do we fit community development within the need to actually challenge that the system is not working for the majority of the population?
You want to answer, Lucius, or no? We don't need to answer because it's about the book. But Lucius,
Comments, Lucius.
I will comment. I think what Ian is sharing with us, I mean, it will be always a tension and a vital challenge. But I do think, and again, it's my view of development, it is more organic, it is incremental. So if one can actually, show more stories of success, of people taking ownership and initiatives that have enlarged people's choices, irrespective of a current political situation. I mean, one of our registered people here is a person with a name called Lucardia Shyamunda, and she has just done some work on how Zimbabwean small farmers are responding to the crisis. And the crisis is ranging from human-induced climate change
Two, we know the political conundrum that they are in. And I was amazed to see some of the resilience of those small-scale peasant farmers. And I think those are the initiatives that one should learn from, so that if you finally, hopefully, get people that are more coming to power, that are actually more truly there to promote social justice and promote the enhancement of a society and community. And I know, I'm not an idealist in terms of what many politicians are there for in politics, but I do think those things one need to give as best as possible support. And then the notion of evidence-based knowledge and research, again, one should not be too idealistic, but it's also important if one can actually share the evidence and discuss, and even in the powerhouses, and confront and challenge those in power. I remember one African leader that once said that, unfortunately for many in the continent, those with ideas are not in power, and those in power don't have ideas. I would rephrase and say they do have ideas, but only in terms of their command and control what serves their own interest. But I think that will remain a challenge, but we need to be reminded by Peter, it is a small, humble practice, but some people would say, can it be scaled up? I believe it can if you share, and maybe that's where the work is also need to be done at the meso and macro levels, not only at the micro level. Yeah.
Well, yes, and we on page 8 of the book, we use Manfred Max Neef, the Chilean practitioner of human scale development. He argues that the key challenge in human scale development is the micro-macro articulation, which is what we're talking about. How does what happens at a micro level articulate into big scale change? And our case studies are influencing policy at city and provincial levels. So they start small, they build into a community-based structure that's place-based, but because of their longevity, their story continues, they have a scale impact. They link with other projects, and those linkages, which we call scaling across, the scaling up versus scaling across dilemma is part of what we investigate in the book. Okay, so yeah.
Thank you. Lucardia, so maybe it's your turn, so it will be lovely to see you. And Lucardia posed a question to you, Peter, in the context of you rereading the conclusions. Is there anything new you would have added? So if you had the chance, and Lucardia, maybe you can pose your question yourself.
Where is Lucardia? Hello. You're on mute, Lucardia.
Anyhow, Peter, if you want to reflect on that.
Well, I think, Lucardia, you misheard me. When I reread the conclusion today, I was delighted to discover I liked what we had written, which is unusual. You kind of often reread something you wrote and go, oh my goodness. I thought it argues for the haunting of justice and the shadow of evidence. We use that phrase because the question of evidence is often not a scientific one, but a political one, because it's about what are we measuring. It's about what we choose to make visible. And often transformation is invisible. And this is part of the dilemma of a practice that's inviting qualitative change in people's lives. How do you measure that? And yet we articulate very clear sets of practices that are a necessity for an effective practitioner. We articulate a strong set of traditions that are rooted in South African soil, that we are coming from the inside, that therefore disrupt colonial impositions. And I always remember interacting with the National Directorate of Community Development in Pretoria, And there was this tendency to, and it wasn't necessarily, it was a government problem, you know, importing initiatives from Cuba or importing initiatives from somewhere else. Whereas South Africa has such deep roots of tradition and thought and practice. It's like, why are we importing? You know? Yeah. So I think the answer is, I love the conclusion. If you read nothing else, read the conclusion. And I said to Lucius, some people will only read the conclusion. It needs to be the best chapter.
Good. So,
I agree.
Lucius, are you also happy? Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually go further and say that at least there were 3 stories that I would have loved to include if I redo the book. One is a story in the faith-based sector or faith-based community. I believe there's a lot of work coming from that angle, and we know that South Africans tend to give themselves up high on being religious and spiritual. So I think the notion of example of stories of longevity of faith-based initiatives, specifically in urban outreach and urban regeneration, needs to be told and captured. Secondly, I would have loved to include a story around more planet stories, earthkeeping, you know, ecological, you know, I don't want to use the word sustainability, but there's also some wonderful stories all over South Africa that I've picked up. And maybe if again I have a chance to redo the book or to another edition, that would be another story I would love to see adding. And then the third one, I mean, we did the book just before COVID hit us, and I've been invited 3 weeks from now to speak to a fraternity of people about, you know, now I need to put on my sociologist hat. What do I think is the sort of impact of COVID on an individual and on a community and societal level? And I know there's been a massive proliferation of literature on the whole COVID thing, but that is an interesting angle that I think we will have to respond to if you redo the book, say in 3 or 5 years' time. That's mine, but I agree. I think, you know, I again liked it when I reread it the last few days.
Yeah. So thank you. So we've got around 30 minutes left, and I'm sorry, Peter.
No, I'm just seeing there's beautiful questions coming from Nomvula, Dlamini, and good to see you, Nomvula, Doreen. We need a forum.
We'll get there. We'll get there. So Andreas, I want to give you a chance, and then I would like to do our commercial break around the top of the hour, and then after Andreas, Bibi. So Andreas, please.
Okay, is the mic on?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, okay. Nick, René, thank you so much for this opportunity. I, to a certain agree with the one comment that community projects do not always work, because over the last 40 years, I've seen many projects who were failures at the end for whatever reasons. And also what Peter said is very interesting. There are a lot of ideas which are imported. And again, some fail, some do not fail. And if you, for example, look at, that fits with Lucius' idea, for example, informal housing. If you look at UN Habitat, they had, when I was younger, these ideas of best practices, and you kind of copy and adapt it and then somehow make it work. And it does not always work. I mean, one of the big examples is, for example, Shack Dwellers Federation International, which in principle can be said is an excellent idea. And many of these initiatives are actually success stories. I've worked here for many years with the Shack Dwellers Federation in Namibia. And if you say an initiative, let's say somewhere does not work, but that doesn't mean that the other 25 communities which were approached or which approached the federation didn't succeed. They succeeded. And it is based on the Grameen Bank's idea that you get people together who save and then build something without any interference from the outside, if possible. But the problem, for example, is that, especially as now in Namibia, that because these are really the poor people, you can save. But if there's inflation, you cannot really keep up, because at the end of the day, besides all the other activities, they want to build a proper house, 34 square meters. That is the beginning unit. To get that money together, it's a lot of work. To a certain extent, in the past, they had support from the political level. There was one of the few good ministers which I worked with. He said, okay, guys, let's make a deal. Next year, you save. For each and every cent, I'll give you another cent into your account. And they gathered $1 million. So next year, minister came and gave them $1 million. But because it's a very, very slow process, they do not build a lot of houses. So they do not issue a lot of loans which can be repaid, because that's where the big banks make money, because they are getting money back plus interest and. So if you take away the money, then this whole project will collapse. Because the people cannot afford it, simply like this. And another project, which was also interesting, Lucius also knows it, is, for example, the Hull Street project in Kimberley. That was not the poor, it was more a middle-class project. And it also goes around community development, at least the original idea. The idea, I think, was initiated through a Swedish organization, CEDA or something like this. And I visited this project many, many times. And I mean, from my perspective, it's not longer a community project, it's a total failure. It's a conventional housing project in the meantime, because all the ideas where the community should be involved in never materialize. So it's just a new housing project, a boring housing project like any other project. You build houses, get people in, and that's it. So some projects work, others do not work, and there are actually thousands of reasons why a project does not work or whether a project works.
Thank you, Andreas.
That's interesting.
Shall we get some comments from Peter and Lucius around this?
Well, Lucius is the housing expert. I think, we actually talk about the stages of community development that eventually gets to project phase and then might become a program phase. But often we suggest some of the problem is that pre-projects, the investment in relationship and bringing those three people, leadership and experts together in the appropriate relationship is crucial. And so, we call that the meso phase, which is pre-project. Project, yeah. So that's all I'm going to say now. But Andreas, I think like all the chat wisdom coming through, this is an incredible group of people online right now. And I wish we had a community development conference for the next 2 days. But, Lucius.
So, yeah.
So we have some really good responses, and luckily the whole book launch is recorded, so we will be in an advantage position to revisit some of the text here, which is great. Maybe just to comment, like 2 years ago, I've met a big housing contractor that I know that builds sort of houses for the bottom and the poor in South Africa. And when I met him, I asked him, what is he doing? He said, no, I build houses for the state. Now that is exactly the dilemma here, because you don't build houses for the state. You build houses for people, and not even for people. You build houses with people, and even better, you help people to build their own houses. You walk with them, you enable them that they can actually, and we've also got some interesting work in that chapter on housing. And I don't think Peter should label me as a housing expert. There's Lochner and people that know much more about our low-cost housing than what I do. But all I want to say is that there's huge scope for community development thinking and reflexivity in bringing houses for the poorest of the poor. And unfortunately, it's been so sometimes economies of scales. It is also election driven. Every 5 years, there needs to be mortar into the ground. And that is another big impediment, the whole projectization of development work. And that comes in cycles, which we need to be aware of and which we need to play a part.
Thank you, Andreas. So Lucius, is Shay for telling us a bit more about where to get the book, how, and so forth? Lucius, you're
I'm not seeing Shai here, unless I've missed her in the box now, but I will just be very brief. So the book can be ordered directly from the publisher in the UK or from Amazon. That is a bit more expensive for South Africans due to our exchange rate. That's more applicable to the European and the Northern Hemisphere colleagues. But for the South Africans or the African colleagues here, the book will be made available through Yakana Press, who is the local publisher. What I would also do is we have the complete list of people that have expressed an interest to register for this book launch. So we will make sure you get the flyer, and I will push hard that you get it at a reduced price. At least those people, Peter, with your consent, that have walked the extra mile to come here and to join in the discussion. And Shai should have actually shared that, but I'll make sure you get the link or an email to order the book from at a better price than Amazon or from the UK.
Thank you very much. So let's move to a very interesting question by Bibi Bowman, Director of Community Engagement of Northwest University. So it's about the National Research Foundation, the NRF, starting to discuss the need to report on the impact of university research funded by government. Any ideas or comments from your experience? I also know in Britain, the funding organizations, ESRC and so forth, focus on impact now. It relates to effectiveness. So Peter, Lucius, any comments on that?
I will just be very brief. Encourage whatever initiative people are embarking on to write up stories and collect, people's experiences of that initiative, whether good or bad. That's a simple sort of piece of advice. Because at least, forget it for a moment, impact. At least one can actually see how people have related or not related with that sort of project or initiative. That would be my quick and dirty answer, Jaco.
Good. So Leslie, do you want to pose your question yourself?
Oh, thanks. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just interested in hearing your opinions, because I haven't read the book, so I don't know. I've got a bit of an idea where you're coming from. But, lots of our research, although we say it's for the benefit of community and it's community-based, and even, I'm not sure how much of it actually brings about change. So I just want to know what your point of view is on how we should change our research to make sure that we're actually promoting knowledge democracy. We're not going in there, and I think I see in the chat boxes a lot of people having the same, that it should be community-led rather than us going in and help, and saying this is what you must do, because unless the people themselves learn to do it, it's not sustainable. And I think a lot of our research and even the books, and I know it's difficult to publish a book free of charge and open access, especially in South Africa, where you may not then get accreditation for it. But if we just keep the books, very expensive books, then how is that helping to democratize the knowledge amongst the people we're writing about? So I'd just love to hear your point of view, because it's a very difficult question to solve.
Thank you, Leslie. Peter.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, we're grappling here with the ethics of research. And, I actually resigned from my university last May. So, I'm a practitioner again. But I grappled for 15 years in the academy, the tension between the instrumental beast, I call it, the beast that instrumentalizes everything. We are doing research for a purpose that's to do with our careers or the university outputs, money, income. And that instrumentalism gets into our soul. And, Gustavo Esteva says, how do we decolonize ourselves such that we are not so professionalized so that we can be with people in that way you are talking about, walking with people. Now, the whole knowledge economy, open access, you're obviously grappling with that a lot, Leslie. But, you know, I mean, we've written a book that in some ways the archetypal energy of capitalism is extractivism. We extract. So you could say we have extracted stories from communities, but I would hope to say we didn't, because we were invited into those communities with a transparent relationship where they knew what we were doing, and we shared the drafts with key people, such that they felt they had their story documented for the first time, or their story was heard, that there was a witness to their story. And so I think they are the ways we've tried to bring some of your questions into our writing. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for answering it.
Lucius, any comments from your?
I'm happy, Jaco. Let's move with the other questions.
Yes. Nomvula Dlamini made a comment. We have to stop projecting, you know, community development initiatives can fail or succeed. What these initiatives stimulate or unlock is what is critical. So that dynamics is interesting. Any comments on that?
Yeah, maybe just very briefly, and it does also on the work that Fia van der Walt has done on that we come from a very wounded past in South Africa, and often you go in there with an expectation you want to do things with the community, but yet they are so wounded in the past for various reasons that you need almost just to sit down and actually give them time to disclose, to build relationships before you can even contemplate any physical initiative. And I think that is vital. And Fia is making the point also in a PhD thesis and other work stemming from that, which for me was a beautiful position, that remember development, velo is like an envelope you close in. So disvelo or develo means to open up. And it's through that opening up that you're giving people choices. And I think that often doesn't get enough time because it is so instrumentalized and so projectized. Some people also refer to the projectization of community development, that we should also acknowledge that just process work is such important work to actually prepare the ground for other initiatives that could come from that.
Thank you. So please, just a reminder, there's some background noise, so please mute if you're not posing a question. So Mokhadi Molope, so are you around? So I would like you to pose your question in person. Is Mokhadi here?
Good morning,
Yes.
everyone. Mokhadi Molope here, Northwest University. Yeah, I've not yet read the book, I must confess, but after this discussion, I'm encouraged to definitely read it, and I will do so.
Yes, Mokhadi. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jaco. Yeah, colleagues, we do know that in South Africa, we are going through a process of professionalization of community development. But unfortunately, we have noted that it is bureaucrat dominated, something which is totally against all the principles of community development that we know. So the simple question that I have to the authors is, how does, as well as to which extent does the chapters contribute to the deconstruction of community development, given the professionalization journey that we are currently undergoing? Thank you very much. I hope my question is clear.
Thank you, Mokhadi. Peter, Lucius.
Yeah, I mean, the history section in the book outlines some of that professionalization process in the last 20 years of community development, with the association, the naming of the occupation, the presidencies, you know, the national community development program. I think we live with a big dilemma here that many of us grapple with, because without a profession, we're not at the table, and we have very little means to skill practitioners in a very complex practice, a social practice that is responsive, adaptive, respectful, ethical. And you can't do that in an ad hoc way. But of course, as soon as we build a program, yes, because of the issue of scale, becomes bureaucratized. In Australia, we've resisted professionalization of community development for this reason. And we live with the consequences of that as well. We're not at the table in the same way as social work associations or other professions. So I think I'm just going to say we in the book recognize the professionalization, and I guess we're trying to contribute a book that says, well, if we're going to have professionals, let's be deprofessionalized professionals. That makes sense.
If I may add here.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I think I want to put Gray again on the spot, because Gray would know currently how many community development accredited programs, either degree courses or short learning programs universities are currently offering. Maybe Gray could just actually touch base or share with us.
Gray?
Thank you. At this point, we have the University of the Free State and the University of the Northwest. They have just started rolling out the NQF Level 8 qualification. And while the issue is bureaucratized, I think we are at a point where, in order to change the system, we also have to get involved. I think that's one way to also articulate our voices against this bureaucratization, and also to ensure that we are at par with each other. So there is a need for inclusivity on the one hand, and I understand where the previous speaker is coming from. There is need for inclusivity, but there's also need to really outline, a process to professionalize, to homogenize a profession which in many respects cannot all be homogenized, but we need to homogenize the qualifications, which is what I think Prof. Lucius would like me to respond to. So we have 2 universities now that offer the NQF Level 8 qualification. Others are coming on stream. I'm aware Northwest is also preparing for that, to start also offering the NQF Level 8. And UJ short learning programs, I am not aware of any at this point, but I know there are some level 5 qualifications offered at FETs as well. So I think that's in broad, that's the brief I can give at this point.
Thank you, Gray. That's quite exciting. So let's move to Doreen. Doreen, you make a comment on, confidence is important within communities, but then you also make this statement, there's a widespread sense of powerlessness among ordinary people in South Africa. Would you like to just kind of expand on that?
Hi, can you hear me? I'm not going to start the video, okay, because I'm in a rural area. Is that okay?
Hi, okay, Doreen.
So, gosh, I haven't seen you forever. I'm still here in Philippolis. I think there's 2 sets of disempowerment. The one is that let's basically racialize this because it's part of the racial legacy that we've got in this country. I think white people largely are still disempowered after 1994, because before that, the political system looked after them, and they actually never really learned ways of community development. They were excellent at bureaucratic development. And what we're finding now in very recent times, last year, is that white people are starting to say, hang on, but we can fix the water pipes. Oh, how do we fix the water pipes? Oh, we need to work with other people to fix the water pipes. And so indirectly, they actually, through tackling practical problems, they're actually willy-nilly learning some kind of community development. But the extent of powerlessness amongst whites is phenomenal. amongst, and again, I'm sorry I'm racializing this, but amongst Black and colored people, I think for a long time after 94, there was the idea that the state would provide. Because we now have a benign state that's going to look after us. And in so many ways, the state does, say through social grants. You just rock up and you get your grant, you see. So it inculcates an idea that if the state wants to, it actually can dispense goodies. But of course, the state can't. Because the more complex things, and particularly at lower levels of the state, are very difficult to do, and they don't have the skills very often to do it or the resources. And so often this frustration finds its way into upheavals and protests. It's quite interesting in the white community how there's often little jokes about, oh, we should also learn how to toy. But that's in a way also, you know, more of a symptom than an actual addressing of the cause, because you're still toying in order to, and at worst you burn down the local library in order to get some attention. You want the state to notice you, to see your distress so that the state can come and fix things. And I think gradually the penny is dropping. That the state's not going to do that, and that the locals have to take hands across all sorts of boundaries of race, class, ideology, misconceptions, prejudice, and whatever, and fix the water pipes. And that's an enormous opportunity because it's practical, it's outcome driven. You know, obviously in the process, you can screw it up, you can antagonize other people, you can get it wrong. And what we're finding in my town is that we're also reaching out to the municipal workers, who are a very interesting group of people because they're deeply frustrated with the way that they're being managed by their superiors. So in effect, by showing the municipal workers that we actually care about their plight, because they can't do their job, they don't have the resources, they don't have a vehicle, they don't have spades, you know. That they can be part of the joining of hands. So in a way, I think we're ripening now. I think the legacy of the apartheid system in both ways is now dwindling away, and people are actually now starting to get real.
Thank you, Doreen. So any comments, Peter, Lucius?
I think they're very insightful comments, and yeah, I think that phase post-apartheid of waiting for the state to deliver has evolved onto a more, you know, mature understanding that we as communities have to learn together and take action, not wait for the state. And I think that's why I love that we draw on Neville Alexandra, you know, Biko, and the Eskia chapter really grapples with. Eskia's writing is beautiful about this dilemma you talk of, Doreen. You know, do we wait? How long do we wait? When are we just gonna start working together? And obviously part of the woundedness across the colonized and the colonizers is the loss of the capacity to cooperate, a confidence, to a skill of cooperating. You know, our woundedness divides us. So part of this work is a healing practice of confidence building, reskilling in cooperation, which takes time, you know. And we use the framework in the book, you know, that empowerment framework is confidence, networks, relationships, and resources. To be empowered is to have more confidence, and to be empowered is to have relationships you didn't have, and to be empowered is to have access to networks you never previously had access to, and the bringing together of these resources. So thank you, Doreen. I know you do amazing work, like many people on this.
No, thank you, Peter. So on that note of healing, of confidence, of networking, and so forth, I think we should wrap up. There are some wonderful other, you know, comments and questions, and my goodness, what a stimulating meeting. So Lucius, if you would like to say a last few words.
Could I just, before I say a few words of thanks, ask I'm assuming that the chat text will also be in the recording, Jaco. Am I right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, good. And pardon my ignorance. I was just asking that because I think it's vital, since we don't have our North and South American colleagues, and I've received quite a number of emails of people that want to actually engage with the recording. And while I'm at that, again, I want to say thank you for Octentia, for Ian Rothman, the director, you, Jaco, and Anjunet Jordan has put in a lot of background work to engage with the media and social media to market the book launch. So thank you so much for providing a very effective platform, because we need effectivity and not only affection to make such a big thing work. I've already thanked Peter as my soulmate and my friend for inviting me to do this book with him. I've really learned a lot. I also want to thank so many other colleagues. If you buy the book, you will see who I've thanked, whether you're in or not. I'm just joking. But also for my Northwest colleagues, my new home since November 2018. Thank you so much, particularly for Prof. Babs Suralal. He was also here, one of the Vice Dean Research, and some of the other people that immediately, also financially supported the project when it gets to language editing. In fact, the language editor was also here, Cecile van Zyl. And then also, supporting some of the monies that we have to pay, the Iskia Pashlele Foundation, etc. Thank you so much for the Northwest University people. Also for the Iskia Pashlele Foundation. Pascal, I'm not seeing in your SIPO, for them actually agreeing that we could use the late father and grandfather's work. I want to thank the publishers, Practical Action Publishing, Rosanna Denning and her team. I think they've done an excellent job. And we're very thankful. And then also for the role that Jacana will still play, the local distributing agent, to make the book more accessible for our Southern African colleagues. I want to thank the endorsers. You will note them all. And Stella Nkomo, you've alluded to, Cornel Hart from UWC, Adam Habib, the previous Vice-Chancellor Wits, for his words of kindness and appreciation. Doug Rieler, and also Sally Timmel. Not many people will know that she was one of the key people that were also training Steve Biko many, many years ago, and actually inspiring him to actually continue with the community animation work. So thanks also for her endorsement. We really appreciate that. And then I want to thank all the people that have taken some precious lifetime to be here with us, because this is not taken for granted, taking 90 minutes out of your life. So thank you so much for that. And those that are older, Jaco, it's more in your terrain, those that are closer to the near-death experience or the death experience, even for you, thank you even more. Because, as you grow older, the time gets in a way more precious, because you have limited time left. But thank you so much for that. I think I've thanked everyone. Peter, I don't know whether you want to come in and particularly want to thank other people, but I've just looked at my list. But I'm quite happy, and I really enjoyed the comments and the discussion.
Yeah.
I think we've hit the time of 11:30, and you've done a lot of thanks. Thanks, Jaco and Gray. And I am a visiting professor at the Free State University, the Center for Development, and I want to acknowledge Lochner and the others at that university who have hosted me to write this book over many years. So thank you for the center there, Anita Venta, Doreen, and many others. So that's it. I'm going to eat my dinner. It's 7:30 p.m.
Thank you, colleagues, friends, even family. So this is much more than just a provocative title. These two really and seriously and reflexively tried to answer this question. All the best. Cheers. Keep well. Thank you.